My mind often comes back to childhood memories. Things that could never be real are vividly imprinted in my mind and etched into my soul. Pale withered arms reaching out with their elongated fingers, surfacing from a well, slowly creeping closer to a bird perched on the rim till the rotting fingers wrap around it in an instant. A silhouette of a man 7 feet tall, with red eyes staring at me beyond the doorway of my room. His breathing labored as each exhale sounded like there was popcorn popping in his throat. I can recall even in the dark the man seemed darker than everything around him, as if his shape was cut out of the space he resided in. A monster looming over me as I woke up on the school bus, being unable to move a muscle, its mouth agape with sharpened teeth, readying itself to swallow me whole, lifeless eyes staring into my soul as my eyes spin in my skull looking for someone to help me. Sitting in the classroom during a lecture while worm-like creatures pierce through the walls, some slimy substance falling off themselves as they push through. There are so many of these memories that revolve in my mind that I could never write them all. But even when they had woken me up in a cold sweat with nail marks indented in the skin of my palms, I could still believe it was all just a bad dream, caused by an overly stimulated imagination of a child. How I wish I could still think of them as nightmares and childhood terrors, conjurings of a cursed imagination. It all had to be fake. They were nothing but childhood fears, so they surely would never rear their ugly faces once more, and I felt relief in that thought. I'm sure most children had seen things that go bump in the night, or at least felt it was there, such as a monster under the bed waiting for your foot to drop down to drag your body under. But as a child grows up, such things leave their minds as wild fantasies that reality would never glance at, and they usually are just that. A cruel fate has taken this thought that gave my mind reprieve and solace from those recollections, and now something that is not myself compels me to write this wretched story no matter how well I try to resist and plead for my hands to halt. If pressing a blade to my throat and slicing would stop this torment, it would have been done, yet they stop me. They bind me here, shackling my body to a place I once called my refuge. All this place appears as now as my prison and personal hell. Strings sewn into the fibers of my muscles, propelling me towards an inevitable end. Any resistance is met with overwhelming strength by the puppeteer. Even now, hot breath is on the nape of my neck. Something is closely watching everything I do. It acts as if it wants to be seen, that it wants affirmation from my eyes, yet it doesn't allow myself to do such a thing. I haven't seen what is behind me. The moment my body whipped around, there's still a cold breath on my nape. The creature feels familiar. Maybe it just wants to be in my mind. I think they all do. Maybe its goal is to drive me insane. Maybe it observes for the others. Any guess would be pure conjecture. And there is a feeling in the depths of my soul that the real reason it stands behind is worse than any theory crafted by my mind. I'm not used to these arrangements, yet even after a few days of this insanity, the exhaustion of my mind has considerably dulled the fear that was held in my heart when all this started. I was finally happy, you know. Most of my life was experienced in solitude. Connections with people were daunting, but life had started to appear less grim in my eyes. A ray of light entered this life of mine from a chance encounter when we bumped into each other while I was at work. One thing led to another, and we went on a date. The date turned into 2, then 3, then more than I could count. We got along well. She was able to put up with my quirks, and she was someone even a freak like me could be comfortable around. The feeling of comfort she radiated was never experienced even from my own family. Everything was a wonderful dream in which there would be no want to wake up from. Yet that light vanished, disappeared in a heartbeat. It's when my everything was ripped away, all the meat of my life and soul flayed off by a malevolent force. Some things aren't explainable. Have you ever seen something so out of place that you were utterly baffled by what you see? And if you were to see something your mind couldn't comprehend, what would you do? The answer for myself became painfully obvious to me now. I would just stare, unmoving, speechless. My wife and I were having a midnight walk like we often had. It wasn't dangerous where we lived, and we enjoyed the scent of the midnight air, the contrast to the day making it ever more alluring. There was something calming about the empty roads illuminated by street lamps, all the lights of houses and most signs of life gone to rest. My hand in hers as we chatted about whatever we could come up with, and never seeming to run out of topics to discuss. That night was supposed to be like any other night. It was going as expected until we saw the newly built playground in our neighborhood. In the dark there were children. From their stature they looked to be no older than 8 years. As I played on the equipment, I could hear little quiet laughs echoing around. The laughter felt close, like it was in my skull, yet also distant. At the time, what the children were doing eludes me, as they were not what my eyes had affixed themselves to at the time. Something difficult to describe filled my vision. Even now a splitting headache surfaces when trying to remember. But my will alone is not enough to suppress this ardent desire to write which isn't my own. The being had the shape of a large deformed dog. At least that was the shape of its silhouette. It was illuminated by a streetlight, yet even under the light, its shape seemed to be constantly shifting. Its shadow was the only thing that stayed consistent. The creature was so black it absorbed almost all light, save for one feature that reflected all back. A white mask on the creature's head. There were black ovals on the ivory masks that only emphasized the empty void-like sockets where eyes should have been. I would have observed it for longer and under awe, but the feeling of my wife's hand slipping from mine brought me back into consciousness. She asked me what I was staring at. My mind was stunned. She had no clue what horrid being beyond comprehension stood before us. How could she not see something that towers over us, that makes the air itself around it dense and cold? Speech refused to exit my mouth to answer her question. It was like my voice was desperate to hide from what lurked outside. She told me she wanted to ask the kids on the playground what they were doing out at night like this. Oh, how I wanted to stop her. I wanted to scream at her to run, or to grab her hand and take her back to her home pretending this was all a bad dream. However, what I wanted to do had no bearing on what my body would do. This body of mine stood motionless. There was cement on my feet and hands as well as a muzzle on my mouth, and something akin to a scratchy liquid filling my throat. I watched in terror as she walked into the field. My eyes gazed ahead and saw the children once more, or what should have been children. Upon closer inspection, their bodies weren't alive. Their bones were broken and jutting out in grotesque ways, and their skin was rotting away, turning into a rancid black sludge, yet still sticking to the bones. The kids played on the equipment as their joints moved in unnatural directions. I frantically looked at my wife, who kept moving closer and closer to them, hoping she would sense something amiss and fall back to me. Thinking back on it now, they were so far away, and my vision was never that good. Their appearance shouldn't have been known to me. It was as if an imagery of them were engraved in my mind's eye, worming its way into a place where it could dwell. My wife moving towards them had me momentarily forget the biggest threat, and when it came back to the forefront of my mind, panic overwhelmed me more than it ever had done before. Moving the only thing I could move, I looked at the creature hoping, no, praying, that it would ignore who was walking near it. To my horror, it was staring intently at my wife. Black substance dripped from the bottom of the mask, like slobber. Large drips fell to the ground, but there wasn't any splash. I don't want to recall this. I don't want to remember. Why must I recall this wretched memory? Why must I continue to write what seems like the tales of a man gone mad? What occurred is something I wish I could have forgotten and have whiskey take my mental faculties away, the next a bullet to provide permanent reprieve. If memory had been taken from me like the others, I may have felt dead, but it wouldn't have been as soul-crushing as the curse of remembrance. The creature began to move towards my wife. The children stopped their act of merrily playing and stared at her with their empty sockets as she slowly approached them. They were like the call of a siren beckoning my beloved. Closer and closer, all defeated whatever the creature in the grass was. The dog-like creature sped up in an instant. It barreled towards my wife, and all that could be done was to watch in utter terror. With screams of warning wanting to exit my lungs, with such ardor that it felt like my lungs were bursting. But my mouth was only left agape without the exit of a single breath. The white mask cracked and gaped open, with only a void where its gullet should have been. The creature moved at an ungodly speed where it became just a smear in my vision. Then her being was no more. Vanished, as if she was never there to begin with. Everything felt futile. I couldn't even move. My eyes had to watch who I cared for most be devoured, as not even my fingers could move. A feeling of faintness came upon me thereafter. I don't know if the creature caused it or if it was a shock, but the thudding sound of my body when it hit the ground and the crack echoed in my mind as I faded from consciousness. When my eyes had opened up, sticking to Sandman dust that was on my eyelids, it became apparent to my horror that it was now day. Jolting up with eyes wide, it became known to me that the creature and children were gone. My body, no longer held down by an invisible force, leapt up and darted to the playground for anything that might have been dropped or would have given a sliver of a clue as to what happened last night. The amount of time that passed searching for clues gone and went into the blue. I combed through the grass, checked every piece of equipment, and even dug through the sand for hours. Some people passing by gave me strange looks, but it didn't matter. The place where the creature under the light stood had nothing either. There was not a hint of its existence. The grass didn't even look disturbed by something that should have had enough weight to leave dents in the ground. My face was buried in my hands as I thought of what to do next. How could I explain what occurred to anyone? It'd be like the ramblings of some crazy. Maybe if they heard my explanation, they'd think it was me who had killed her. Then it would be an impossibility to find her. So many thoughts rushed into my head. They were loud, deafening. My next step eluded me. Laughter billowed out of me. All the fear and anxiety had me in hysterics. It felt like something snapped in my mind, and an overwhelming sense of shame overcame me for laughing in such a situation. Tears streamed down my cheeks as the laughter continued. What kind of cruel joke was this when my life finally began to have meaning? My lungs burnt and my vision blurred from the fit of laughter. My head felt light as I collapsed once more. My eyes opened and my head felt fuzzy. It was a moment of bliss and ignorance before memories rushed back to me, and remembering almost sent me in another fit. Sitting in the sand of the playground for some time, my mind attempted to process all the nonsensical information in what I had hoped to be a calm manner. I wanted to call the police, but the chance of that successfully working seemed so slim. So the only thing that seemed reasonable was to go home. Then I tried to contact someone. I walked down the street, my head cast down in shame as I followed the path we walked together only last night. My body swayed back and forth like a drunkard, and almost all vigor had left me. The house was almost within reach after some time. The thoughts of last night were playing in my mind the entire way. The effort to move my body up the steps of the house was monumental. A momentary thought slipped into my mind as I slid my key into the door, imagining that she would be waiting there, wondering why her husband was wearing such a downcast expression. She'd offer her open arms for an embrace to cure whatever disease was in my mind. Yet when the door clicked and opened, it was dark with the curtains shut from last night, and not a soul was present. I pressed the switch by the doorway and the light flickered to life. My head scanned around and something in my mind registered everything was off. The first thing that had caught my attention was the color of the walls. Rubbing my eyes and opening them once more only showed me the same image that I thought must have been a trick of the light. Moving closer to a wall by the door, my hands pressed against it. It was cool to the touch, the paint was dry. It couldn't have been new, but it made no sense if it wasn't. When my wife and I had purchased the house, she had wanted to spruce up the place. We painted the walls a bluish gray. She spent weeks deciding on the color. The matter of what color the house should be never seemed that important to me, but she was so adamant on picking just the right one, and it was a pleasant time seeing her so excited. We spent a good few weekends painting the entire house after her decision on the color. I can still recall the blunders that I made when doing cutting. When she saw, she told me it would just add a bit of character to the house that would have us recall this moment. That slight, barely noticeable mistake that held so much importance was now gone, without a trace. Those fond times with her still revolved in my mind, yet when I stared at the walls of my home, all I saw was a white that made me sick. It was as if what we had done never even occurred. Moving around the house led to more discoveries of subtle and direct changes. Our portrait from a street artist wasn't hanging in the hallway, our curling iron wasn't sitting atop the bathroom counter. A side of the bed was missing her stuffed toys. There were so many inconsistencies that it made a chill run down my spine and question if I even went into the right house. The feeling of unease crept up on me. It was my abode, yet everything changed to the point where it felt like rummaging around in a stranger's place. My head was full of thoughts and it all felt jumbled. It was pointless looking anymore, so I made my way to the living room for my body and mind to have a breather. The couch was different too, but too many thoughts were already revolving around that the thought slipped away as quickly as it entered. My head leaned back on the cushion and just stared at the ceiling. Even the ceiling was different. The popcorn roof, which we had removed, was back once more. It really seemed that any evidence of her living in this house vanished into thin air. I stayed seated on that couch for so long, wondering what could be done in this situation which reality should never have humored. Thoughts slowly began to organize, and my first action was decided. I wanted to talk to her parents. They knew me. They would believe me. Reaching my hands into my pocket, I pulled out my phone. The screen apparently cracked from the fall in the field. A slight feeling of annoyance bubbled up when I went to press my finger to the screen, and it caused my finger to bleed. Ignoring the new blood on the phone, I pressed on the phone icon at the bottom bar. The app opened, but it was affected like the house. Her parents' numbers were removed from my phone as well as many others. Looking at the list of contacts, I noticed her number was gone as well. Another knot tied itself in my stomach when I saw her contact completely missing. Panicking, I dialed her number, but all I had gotten was a response saying the number wasn't in use. Frustration kept piling onto me and things kept looking bleaker. My phone moved through the air before my mind had even registered that I had thrown it. It made a thud as it hit the floor. The feeling of needing to talk about her to someone rushed like a tidal wave. There must be someone to contact. However, most of my connections were from her, and they all had seemed to be gone without a trace. Blank spaces on my screen where their names used to be were the only things remaining. Sitting there in silence, I racked my brain to try and find a solution. Maybe there was a simple solution that I was overlooking. Ideas rushed in my head until an epiphany came. It would be hard to contact someone, but if they were in a place I already would go to, it would be easy to meet them. At that moment, it became clear what my next move would be. My wife often spent time with a coworker of mine. If I just met with her tomorrow, I could see if the rearrangement of my house and phone were the only things that changed. It was naive to think it was just the house and my device that were altered, but I was so desperately clinging to anything that would create even a thread of hope, a lifeline out of this situation from hell. There was nothing else I could do waiting for the next day to come. Wanting that day to come more than anything, I decided to try and rest. My feet dragged along the floor as I shuffled to the bedroom. Once my head had hit the pillow, I would like to say I fell asleep, but memories of the prior night tormented me to no end as I tossed and turned. Dawn had came after what felt like eons. Giving up on the idea of sleep, I resolved myself to ready myself for the day. Thoughts felt blurred and balance non-existent as I swung my feet over the bedside and attempted to stand up. My legs buckled as soon as my body went upright and I fell down to the floor. Every muscle was exhausted. Even moving a finger was almost too much to do in my current state. As I sat there on the floor, there was a sensation on the back of my neck. It felt like breath. It was warm and made the spot, which it blew on damp. Turning back and saying nothing eased my mind at the time, as I just blamed it on fever or the body acting strange with sleep deprivation. There was something much more pressing that I had to do after all. There was a resurgence of my energy, if only by a hair's width, after a few minutes, which allowed me to move. With the little energy I now had, I began making my way to the kitchen to steep some coffee to stave off this exhaustion. It was one step after the other, with my full attention being on each step as to not stumble. My body was sluggish, and I doubted in my current state that I could even make it to my work without collapsing. But sleep wasn't an option, so loading my nervous system with enough caffeine to kill an elephant had to do. Entering the kitchen, my body still felt exhausted, but it had seemed to ease somewhat after getting further from the bedroom. My hands shook as I grabbed a cup from the cabinet above the coffee maker. Preparing coffee with enough ease, I then moved to the dining table to take a seat. The coffee slowly dripped into my cup. With it taking so long, I thought it'd be best to begin cleaning myself up while it was being made. Standing up, I exited the kitchen and made my way to the bathroom to freshen up. I thought my coworker might just run away if I looked so disheveled. If a coworker came to me looking like a bat out of hell, I'd probably get out of there as fast as possible as well. While inching towards the bathroom, it felt like gravity became greater, and looking ahead towards my bedroom door created a sinking feeling in my soul. Luckily, the bathroom wasn't past the bedroom. If it was, I'm not sure what I would have done. Pressing the switch in the hall, the light of the bathroom flickered on. The bulbs seemed to be on their last bit of life as they flickered erratically. When I entered the bathroom, my eyes focused on the mirror as I stared at myself in disbelief. The hairs on my head were grey, creases lined my face to where one would think I aged 30 years. I brought my hand up and ran it down my face. It was rough, and the skin had lost its elasticity. Would my coworker even recognize me? I don't even look like the same person she had talked to last week. Worrying about these things now would be pointless, however. Maybe I could just cover myself up and say I have a cold. Even though I knew it was pointless to worry, I couldn't help but wonder what was happening to me. It wasn't natural. No man should randomly grow old in the span of a day, but it was just another strange thing to add to the list of occurrences. After some freshening up, I grabbed clothes from the hamper. The feeling my bedroom gave off was just too daunting to come closer to now that I became aware of it. The rest of time was spent drinking cup after cup of coffee, till heart palpitations kicked in as I waited till I could leave. I had grabbed my phone off the floor while waiting. The blood on it was crusted and there was a small dent on the corner, but luckily my throat didn't break it further. I then went back to the kitchen to wait. Tapping my foot on the ground, sitting at the dining room table while absorbed in my anxiety was the only thing I could do. When time came for work, I grabbed my coat, scarf, and toque from the coat hanger by the door. I'd look on, but at least they wouldn't see the change of my face and body. The coat was larger, as if I had shrunk. It made me question whether I had the right one or not, but after a few seconds I was sure it was mine. Getting to work went smoothly, fortunately. I entered the building and saw a few puzzled looks, likely wondering why I was covered head to toe. My mind only had one thought: to find my coworker. I looked around at the front of the store, but she wasn't there, so I made my way to the back. Opening the door to the back, I saw her, and my strange choice of clothing seemed to have grabbed her attention. She looked at me for a second, and then asked me what I was doing. "Why are you wearing that? It's the middle of July." Oh, I just have a bit of a cold. Thought I could still work, but now that I'm here, I'm not too sure. Well, better tell the manager so you can go home already. You already aren't looking so great. She was looking me up and down. My body was shaking from all the caffeine, and I was breathing heavily. No wonder why she would say something like that. Oh, yeah, but first, can I talk to you about Sophia? Sophia? It didn't seem like she remembered. My heart was cracking slowly by the tone of her reply. It was like she was talking about a stranger. After a pause, she continued. The name sounds familiar. She held her head in her hand, and her eyebrows furrowed. It feels familiar, but I'm drawing a blank. I'll contact you later if I remember. I saw her face wince a bit, like something struck her. Oh man, give me a second. My head's throbbing. I'll contact you later. Yeah. No problem. Just text me when you're up for it. She seemed puzzled for a second before responding. Why would I have your number? Why did I think I had your number? The response gave me a glimpse of hope. Maybe memory still resided in her subconscious, even if she couldn't remember. Right now, though, I doubted spilling everything would work, so I just made up an excuse. Oh, well, we've worked together for a while, so it'd make sense. But no worry, I'll just write it down for you. I grabbed a random receipt from my coat pocket and grabbed a pen on the table. I quickly wrote it down, then handed it to her. In any case, I'm gonna go back home and rest up. I hope your headache gets better. I hope so too. With that, I left the building, then drove back to my house. After entering my home, I slammed the door and went back to the couch. Even if they had some underlying memories, their memories of her were removed. They really didn't know her. She really was gone. If I had more energy, I would have gone into a fit of rage, but I was just so exhausted. The effect of the caffeine was weakening, and I just sat there in a semi-comatose state. At one point, I could have sworn I saw worms exiting the walls like they had when I was a child, but they vanished in the blink of an eye. While being in that state, time passed quickly. It was a while before I was snapped out of it by a phone call. Reaching my hand into my pants pocket and looking at the screen, I saw a number that was familiar. But without the name of the contact, I couldn't recall who it was. I answered the phone and a delirious voice seeped out. What did you do to me? The voice startled me, and I regretted having the phone so close to my ear when answering. Right after you asked me that question, that incessant headache started. I left early due to the headache, and when I got home I began to remember. I remembered Sophia, and right when I recalled her is when these things started growing on my body. And I'm seeing strange things in my vision. What's happening? What did you do? I didn't do anything. Something happened and I just wanted to see if someone remembered her. Well, great for you. Now I'm in deep shit. I tried to call for 911, but the only number I'm able to call is yours for some reason. Just get over here. I don't want to be alone, and I'm feeling cold. At the last part of the sentence, her voice sounded hollow, lacking the emotions a human would carry. Like she was losing herself. I was worried and I knew I had to go. She gave me her address before hanging up, and after putting the coordinates in my phone GPS, I dashed out of the house. It hadn't taken me long to get to her house by car, 8 minutes at most. When I arrived, the door was slightly ajar, and there were no lights visible from the outside. I crept closer to the house, but felt an ominous aura emanating from it. But if she wasn't there, this was all my fault. Shouldn't I go in? With some newfound resolve, I headed towards the entrance. The door creaked as it opened slowly, and there was a chill in the air coming from within the house. Moving through the doorway, I found the light switch and attempted flicking it on, but I had no luck. It was dead. So with my phone as my only light source, I turned on the flashlight and continued through the house. There was a thin layer of ice lining the walls, and also some white tendril-like lines lining all sides of the rooms. The chill of the air got worse as I carried on, and the crooked white lines seemed to have gotten more dense and became one in some parts. It was certainly creepy, but there was some allure to it as well. I wanted to touch the walls, but my gut begged me not to, so I obliged. The lines took off to the right to a hallway and then a door. I followed them and entered a small room. What lay before me was a corpse. The corpse was blue. Holes perforated its body, and through the holes mushrooms had sprouted. Ice crystals had formed all around the skin, and the white lines poured out from below the body. In that moment I realized what the light lines were. They were mycelium for the mushrooms in the body. I stood there, bending over in an attempt to get a look at the face. But that was too full of holes, and large mushrooms protruded from where the mouth would have been. I stood there in disbelief, and upon noticing the shirt she was wearing, I knew who this was. My co-worker, who I had been talking to only moments before, became this. I began to back away, but the body began to twitch and convulse. It rose to its feet like a puppet, and I could see mycelium from the ceiling holding it up. It looked at me with that face full of holes. Its left arm raised, and it made a motion beckoning me over. A gargled sound welled up within it. Was she not dead yet? If she wasn't dead yet, she would be soon, and there was no way I would touch that. I began to step backwards. When the creature heard the cracking of ice my foot made when I moved, it lunged. I saw mycelium peel off the walls as the body began to hurtle towards me. Its mouth full of mushrooms grew wide enough to where I could see the stalks. I turned around and began to bolt, energy swelling up within me in this do or die moment. The mycelium seemed to pulse along the walls, and the ice made it difficult to fully run. Luckily, it made what was chasing me slip as well. I continued to run. I swear I should have been out of the house by then, but the end seemed no closer and my stamina was fading. The creature's stamina seemed unlimited as it never lost steam. My mind was going blank from exhaustion and my muscles began to ignore my pleas to move. It was at that moment I lost control over my body, and that breath on my neck reappeared. My body began to gain speed, but I wasn't the one moving. My body moved in strides, but it was as if I was watching a movie. I saw it leap over objects, and when it found the window, it jumped through, covering my body in cuts. When it exited the house, it hadn't stopped. It was like something was taking my body for a joyride. I didn't feel exhausted, even with my body moving at breakneck speed. I looked around and saw so many strange creatures. Creatures that towered over the city patrolled around, and these multicolored scorpion-like creatures moved out of drainage holes. I could see human-like creatures staring me down, some with saliva dripping from their mouths, others with their arms and legs disproportional to their body. Some had no faces, others had eyes floating around their heads. It was like memories of my childhood all over again. I attempted to resist the movement of my body, but it would not listen. I had no energy, and it allowed whatever it was to gain full control. It eventually made its way to my house, with me being its unwilling cargo. The worms that once flashed in my vision and left were now moving through the structure of the house constantly, shifting themselves through the ceiling and floor as well. When I entered my house, I saw where it was taking me, back to my room, the source of a carnal fear that flooded my psyche. It was hopeless to resist as it dragged me there. It sat my body down on the desk in my room, and that was that. I don't know how long I've been like this. It gave me back some ability to move my head and arms, but my legs are still planted in place. If I try to resist its desires, it takes control once more. Things enter this room every now and then, but their strange appearances have become normal to me. They stare for a while before leaving. I don't know what they are doing. It seems my need for food and water have dissipated. I don't know what my body has become now, but I'm afraid to know, so I keep my phone away so I can't see a reflection. After all this time, I'm fairly certain that I'm a tool to spread their influence, sowing ideas of them into the minds of people. How many more people will they take away, I wonder? It's not like they'll be missed, they'll be forgotten like everyone else, and anyone who does remember will simply be new prey. Well, now that I've finished writing, I can't say for sure what will happen next. If I'm lucky, maybe I'll be finished off, but who's to say? I guess I never got to figure out what happened with my wife, and I doubt I ever will. Maybe she was lucky and truly disappeared in an instant, or maybe she became a puppet by the creature that ate her. In any case, I'm signing off. And if you ever see these creatures, these things that must have come from hell, I wish you luck.